In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be designing book covers. And it's really fun to design a book cover. You're almost always given a lot of creative freedom. Often, especially if you like the book, you can be really passionate about the design. And you're usually using a combination of type and visuals. And the goal of the book cover design is to really create an interpretation of the book without giving away the secrets of the book or the plot of the book. When choosing type or visuals, make selections based on the feeling or style you wish to convey. For example, strong, bold feelings, you might use a sans serif thick type. Soft feelings, romantic feelings, a serif type. So really think about that type selection. Text and image should always complement each other, and every piece of type and image should be there for a reason. This is a beautiful design. It's a photographic self-portraits book, so it would be something you would put on your coffee table perhaps. And it's a really appropriate cover image because you see the actual process of this man taking his portrait with a really old camera, and these are photographic self-portraits throughout the 20th century, so very appropriate. The title is in color so that you notice it and it becomes more of a focal point, and there's just a beautiful balance going on within the space. Sometimes because you want to do a text-driven design or you don't have a budget to cover imagery, you create a text-driven design. And often it can be a really good solution for you, sometimes the best solution. So here's an example. This is a book about what Obama means for our culture, our politics, our future, and they wanted the design to be really strong. They wanted it to communicate the message immediately, and they played with the color variation, they played with the scale of the font, but they got a title that really made you look and made you know what this book was about. Usually the book cover is the reader's first experience with a book. It often sells the book, and because it sells the book, it has to arouse interest in the story. So when you're deciding on your imagery, think about what visual would capture the book's essence, plot, character, storyline. Often the reader will turn to and contemplate the cover while reading. It becomes part of the whole reading experience. Here's another typographic design. You can see that there's also some playfulness with scale. This top line of text here, you really have to kind of pick the book up and look close to see what it says. And then you have the title. Some of the text is being framed with this black background, so you can kind of really see it. And I think I like how the letters kind of really work together. It's easy to kind of decipher everything, but there's a bold message. Often you do many variations of the design. Sometimes you'll try type and graphics, type alone. You're usually working with a client, often the publisher, who will take your variations, usually 3 or 4 variations, look at them, give you feedback, and then send them back to you so that you can continue to design based on whatever feedback they give you. And usually there's feedback. So you have to go back in and really rethink the piece many different times. And I would say it's not uncommon to start when you start this process to have 30 or 40 variations, and then kind of narrow it down to what you think are the best solutions to send to the publisher. Remember, in design we always have multiple solutions to the problem. So type plus image, what's a really common mistake is for designers to spend, or especially new designers, to spend a lot of time on the illustration or the photo collage. They make a beautiful front graphic and then they kind of don't think about the type, and they kind of put it in there last. And what you really have to make sure is that there's synergy between the type and the visual. This design is really nice. It's a magazine cover, and it's Print's European Design Annual 2000. You can see this playful text down here. Print is really kind of interacting nicely with the graphic. The graphic's kind of soft and blurry, making you really kind of interested in it, wanting to look at it. This is a hybrid design that has a photograph. You can see the old photograph of Feynman, who's an astronomer, and he's talking about, it's a photograph of him giving a lecture on the motion of planets around the sun. So what the designer did is they took the image, they completely desaturated it, they added some color back in, so you see that kind of yellow-orange, and then they carefully drew this solar system graphic. And so there's actually an illustration in here helping to articulate the idea about what's happening in this lecture. And then the text, there's a little more different color added in, so you get some contrast with the color. They chose to kind of put the image right in the center with the title and the motion of the planets around the sun text on top, and then the author or the author's names on the bottom. And this was about Feynman's lost lecture. Image-driven design is where you really consider the visual and you think about what best communicates the design concept. So in this story, South of the Border, West of the Sun, it's about a middle-aged Japanese man who's actually very successful. He has a wife, he has a family, he has a good career, but he keeps feeling this kind of nagging inauthenticity. So he doesn't feel like he is who he should be. And also within this story, there's kind of a love interest or an old love interest where he thinks about this girl that he knew in his past. So you can see the kind of deconstruction of the face, maybe representing the girl on one side and him on the other. So there's actually a male and a female happening here. It's kind of a deconstruction. It's hard to notice, but the two circles represent the female face and the male face, which I'm assuming is him and the girl. And there's kind of this interesting, real disturbing sense of the face being deconstructed and reformed back together and then turned upside down. So it's trying to really capture his mood and what he's thinking about and his, what the story is in kind of a clever way. And then there's a beautiful typographic design going on that really integrates nicely with the image. South of the Border, just placed on top, becomes a primary focal point. I love how they put a novel up here, really simple and subtle, and then the author's name and the quote down here, really appropriate. So another thing to consider when designing a book cover is that you have actually three parts to this design. You have the front, which we've been talking about. You have the back, which is something that the viewer would probably pick up and turn over to look at while they're inspecting the book. And then you have the spine, which is something they might look at if the book were in a bookshelf. And you have to consider the whole package. You have to pull everything together in a continuous piece, but everything also has to function individually. So if you were looking at the front or the back or the spine, it has to be compelling and interesting. And in this particular story, this is Walter Mosley walking the dog, and it's really a beautiful story of a man who spends a big portion of his life in prison. He's released. He goes back to LA, or I think it's a neighborhood in LA, Watts, I think, where he's trying to live a normal life with integrity. And it's about the challenges he's facing because of his past, because who he used to be, and he's really trying to become a different person, but the challenges are enormous. And so it's quite beautiful, and it's a book of stories. Front, back, and spine again. You see the title, JFK. So this is the CIA, Vietnam, and the plot to assassinate John F. Kennedy. The red, white, and blue flag, very symbolic. You see the bullet holes in the cover. You see the real grittiness of the text, kind of matching those bullet holes. And there's this typewriter font in there, kind of getting you that sense of urgency that it's a story being typed up. This was Artie Lange, Too Fat to Fish, and this was a memoir, and this is a comedian who was often on the Howard Stern radio show. He was kind of his sidekick. He's scrappy, funny, profane, and so they wanted to just use his image so that it could kind of captivate you and really see who he is as a person. And because he's so colorful, it really works. There's kind of a lowbrow humor thing going on. Totally different here. This is Obsession, and this one is a great balance of pure concept and strong yet subtle visuals. It's a visible read from a distance, but when you get close, you see this painful process the designer went through to pinprick the typography. You really make the connection between these pinpricks and the idea of obsession. And you can see the pin here. The text is beautifully integrated, and then if you get close to this, it's just an amazing thing to really discover how this was created. This is the hidden curriculum. So you can see they've tore it up, reconstructed it. You can barely read what it says, or maybe you can't read it at all. Then you have this really gritty kind of textural element in the background. And this is having to do with campus conflict, student anxiety. It's caused by mass and unstated academic and social norms which thwart the student's ability to develop independently or think creatively. This is the colors, the iconography, the understated but clear hierarchy. And this was designer Isaac Tobin, and it's really dealing with the history of reflections and very simple design. But it's about iconography, and it really fits that subject matter. This is fractured culture, fractured family life in the hills above LA. So they use this beautiful portrait of a man and woman. They cut it into tiny squares, and then they put it back together again. This used to be an assignment we had in the class for the grid, where you would have to take an image, chop it up, and put it back together in an interesting way. And it really works for this subject matter because it's very disturbing to see this kind of chopped up and reformulated. But there's kind of this really harmonious aspect to a grid where you really want to look at it and decipher it. This is about winemaking, a hedonist in the cellar, adventures in wine. And you see that I love the staining of the wine, the circles really balance the design, make it quite beautiful. And then there's this stain here with the text and the title really working. This was work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. So they took all these books and they lined them up and they put them all back together again because it's about reproduction. There's an actual reproduction occurring.